Chapter 8. The Forests. The coniferous forests of the Sierra are the grandest and most beautiful in the world, and grow in a delightful climate on the most interesting and accessible of mountain ranges. Yet, strange to say, they are not well known. More than 60 years ago, David Douglas, an enthusiastic botanist and tree lover, wandered alone through fine sections of the sugar pine and silver fir woods, wild with delight. A few years later, other botanists made short journeys from the coast into the lower woods. Then came the wonderful multitude of miners into the foothill zone, mostly blind with gold dust, soon followed by sheepmen who, with wool over their eyes, chased their flocks through all the forest belts from one end of the range to the other. Then the Yosemite Valley was discovered, and thousands of admiring tourists passed through sections of the lower and middle zones on their way to the wonderful park, and gained fine glimpses of the sugar pines and silver firs along the edges of the dusty trails and roads. But few indeed, strong and free, with eyes undimmed with care, have gone far enough and lived long enough with the trees to gain anything like a loving conception of their grandeur and significance, as manifested in the harmonies of their distribution and varying aspects throughout the seasons, as they stand arrayed in that winter garb, rejoicing in storms, putting forth their fresh leaves in the spring, while stemming with resiny fragrance, receiving the thunder showers of summer, or reposing heavy laden with ripe cones in the rich sun gold of autumn. For knowledge of this kind, one must dwell with the trees and grow with them, without any reference to time in the almanac sense. The distribution of the general forests in belts is readily perceived. Those, as we have seen, extend in regular order from the one extremity of the range to the other, and however dense and somber they may appear in general views, neither on the rocky heights nor down in the leafiest hollows will you find anything to remind you of the dank, malarial selvas of the Amazons and the Orinoco, with their boundless continuity of shade, the monotonous uniformity of the deodar forests of the Himalaya, the black forest of Europe, or the dense dark woods of Douglas spruce, where rolls the Oregon. The giant pines and firs and sequoias hold their arms open to the sunlight, rising above one another on the mountain benches, marshaled in glorious array, giving forth the utmost expression of grandeur and beauty with inexhaustible variety and harmony. The inviting openness of the Sierra woods is one of the most distinguishing characteristics. The trees of all the species stand more or less apart in groves or in small irregular groups, enabling one to find a way nearly everywhere. Along sunny colonnades and through openings they have smooth park-like surface, strewn with brown needles and burrs. Now you cross a wild garden, now a meadow, now a fatty, willowy stream, and ever and on you emerge from all the groves and flowers upon some granite pavement or high bare ridge commanding superb views above the wavering sea of evergreens far and near. One would experience but little difficulty in riding on horseback through successive belts all the way up to the storm-beaten fringes of the icy peaks. The deep canyons, however, that extend from the axis of the range cut the belts more or less completely into sections and prevent the mounted traveler from tracing them lengthwise. This simple arrangement in zones and sections brings the forest as a whole within the comprehension of every observer. The different species are ever so occupying the same relative positions to one another, as controlled by soil, climate, and the comparative vigor of each species in taking and holding the ground. And so appreciable are these relations, one need ever be at a loss in determining, within a few hundred feet, the elevation above the sea level by the trees alone. For, notwithstanding some of the species range upward for several 100,000 feet, and all pass one another more or less, yet even those possessing the greatest vertical range are available in this connection, inasmuch as they take on new forms corresponding with the variations in altitude. Crossing the treeless plains of the Sacramento and San Joaquin from west and reaching the Sierra foothills, you enter the lower fringe of the forest, composed of small oaks and pines growing so far apart that not 1/20th of the surface of the ground is in shade at clear noonday. After advancing 15 or 20 miles, making an ascent from 1 to 3,000 feet, you reach the lower margin of the main pine belt, composed of the gigantic sugar pine, yellow pine, incense cedar, and sequoia. Next you come on to the magnificent silver fir belt, and lastly to the upper pine belt, which sweeps up the rocky acclivities of the summit peaks in a dwarfed wavering fringe to a height from 10 to 12,000 feet. This general order of distribution with reference to climate dependent on elevation is perceived at once, but there are other harmonic as far as reaching in this connection that become manifest only after patient observation and study. Perhaps the most interesting of these is the arrangement of the forests in long curving bands braided together into lace-like patterns and outspread in charming variety. The key to this beautiful harmony is in ancient glaciers, where they flowed, the tree followed, tracing their wavering courses along canyons and over ridges and over high rolling plateaus. The cedars of Lebanon, says Hooker, are growing upon one of the mountain moraines of an ancient glacier. All the forests of the Sierra are growing upon moraines, but moraines vanish like the glaciers that make them. Every storm that falls upon them wastes them, cutting gapes, disintegrating boulders, carrying flesh away their decaying material into new formations, until at length they are no longer recognizable by any save students who trace their transitional forms down from the fresh moraines still in process of formation through those that are more and more ancient and more obscured by vegetation and all kinds of post-glacial weathering. Had the ice sheets that once covered all the range been melted simultaneously from the foothills to the summit, the flanks would of course have been left almost bare of soil, and these noble forests would be wanting. Many groves and thickets would undoubtedly have grown up on lake and avalanche beds, and many a fair flower and shrub would have found food and dwelling places in weathered nooks and crevices, but the Sierra as a whole would have been in a bare rocky desert. It appears therefore that the Sierra forests in general indicate the extent and positions of the ancient moraines as well as they do the lines of climate. For forests, properly speaking, cannot exist without soil, and since the moraines have been deposited upon the solid rock and only upon elected places, leaving a considerable portion of the old glacial surface bare, we find luxuriant forests of pine and fir abruptly terminated by scored and polished pavements on which not even a moss is growing, though soil alone is required to fit them for the growth of trees 200 feet in height. The nut pine. Pinus sabrianiana. The nut pine, the first conifer met in ascending the range from west, grows only on the torrid foothills, seeming to delight in the most ardent sun heat like a palm, springing up here and there singly or in scattered groups of 5 to 6, among scrubby white oaks and thickets of Xenothus and Manzita, its extreme upper limit being about 4,000 feet above the sea, its lower about 500 to 800 feet. This tree is remarkable for its airy, widespread tropical appearance, which suggests a region of palms rather than cool, resiny pine woods. No one would take it at first sight to be a conifer of any kind. It is so loose in habit and so widely branched, and its foliage is so thin and gray. Full-grown specimens are from 40 to 50 feet in height, and from 2 to 3 feet in diameter. The trunk usually divides into 3 or 4 main branches, and about 15 and 20 feet from the ground, which, after bearing away from one another, shoot straight up and form separate summits, while the crooked subordinate branches aspire and radiate and droop in ornamental sprays. The slender grayish-green needles are from 8 to 12 inches long, loosely tasseled and inclined to droop in handsome curves, contrasting with the stiff, dark-colored trunk and branches in a very striking manner. No other trees of my acquaintance so substantial in body is in its foliage so thin and so pervious to light. The sunbeams sift through even the leafiest trees with scarcely any interception, and the weary, heated traveler finds but little protection in their shade. The generous crop of nutritious nuts which the nut pine yields makes it a favorite of the Indians, bears, and squirrels. The cones are most beautiful, measuring from 5 to 8 inches in length and not much less in thickness, rich chocolate brown in color and protected by strong, down-curving hooks which terminate the scales. Nevertheless, the little Douglas squirrel can open them. Indians gathering the ripe nuts make a striking picture. The men climb the trees like bears and beat off the cones with sticks and recklessly cut off the more fruitful branches with hatchets, while the squaws gather the big, generous cones and roast them until the scales open sufficiently to allow the hard-shelled seeds to be beaten out. Then, in the cool evenings, men, women, and children, with their capacity for dirt greatly increased by the soft resin with which they are all bedraggled, form circles around campfires on the banks of the nearest stream and lie in easy independence, cracking nuts and laughing and chattering, as heedless of the future as the squirrels.